one designer that comes to mind when I think about punk is Rei Kawakubo for Comme des Garçons. I worked at Dover Street Market for quite a long time, and each of those collections is always like a tiny thread of punk, and it's always interesting to see how her protege, Junya Watanabe, has taken what Ray does and interpreted it in his own way, and obviously his collections are very punk influenced. But there's one collection which is quite interesting. It was autumn-winter 92 to 93, and that was probably the most obvious punk influence. It was all kind of black and lots of layers, and the girls had pink spiky hair, and it really stood out for me. And then in summer 2006, she collaborated with Vivienne Westwood, and obviously that's a big punk icon. It was really interesting to see how Ray reinterpreted Vivienne's classic design.
It's such different versions of punk, what you get with Westwood and then what you get with Rei Kawakubo, but I think it's interesting that you mentioned the collection with, the black and the pink hair, because that's very punk in aesthetic, but there also seems to be a punkish attitude about everything Rei Kawakubo does. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking about punk as an aesthetic and then punk as an approach, and Ray definitely does that for me. And also Azzedine Alaïa has a very punkish way of working. He doesn't follow the conventional fashion calendar. I mean, none of his designs are punk in their aesthetic, but he doesn't show on the normal calendar. He does it on his own time, and the fact that he's having a retrospective this year, it's quite an amazing time. That he's amazing feat that he's managed to do that all of this time and just show to clients and buyers and not have big shows. And yeah, that's quite exciting.
Do you think that's kind of when punk's at its best in a modern fashion context? It's when it's that attitude and that feeling of sort of doing what you want and not sort of staying to just not really sort of obeying fashion rules. Do you think that's when it's most interesting, when it is this attitude rather than just
I think punk's at its best when it's unexpected and feels really modern, and I think Ray definitely demonstrates that, and definitely Azzedine Alaïa, that's a very interesting way of working, and I really respect him for doing that, and really fascinated with how he does everything.
Do you remember your first memory of sort of Com? Do you remember first seeing collections and what struck you about them?
I remember looking at the 92, 93 collection a lot when I was at college and thinking, wow, that's really brilliant. And that collection kind of became what Com was for me before I started working for them, and I had a good understanding of what it was.
What was it about it that struck you so much?
I think the silhouettes, and I mean, always the hair is amazing in the Comme des Garçons collections. I'm quite obsessed about like what she asks the hairstylist to do every season. It's always a key part of the collection, and those girls just looked really cool and fresh, and I liked how their hair was really crazy, and then the garments were quite elegant and structured. As a student, in my head, Comme des Garçons was all about black, and when I started, it was quite interesting because there were lots of like spring, summer 2006 or 7, and there was lots of bright colours and kind of cartoonish proportions, and kind of learn a new side to come, and every collection that came in, it was always really unexpected. But then when you broke it down, there was always like the key codes, like the flat shoes and the drop crotch pants and a shirt. And yeah, a lot of people always think Com's quite complicated, but I guess when you're working with it like that, like you get to understand it, and yeah, it's a very, very interesting brand.
You mentioned Rei Kawakubo and Alaïa as being punkish for sort of very different reasons. Are there any other designers that stand out for you for having a punk spirit for any other reason?
Ray is punk on an aesthetic level, and Alaïa by his approach to work, but Raf obviously cites music as one of his key influences, and he's always talking about new wave and punk music. And one of his first collection in autumn winter 96, 97, and he did it in a gallery space, and he projected a video on the wall, and that had footage of the models on the wall, and then the same models were in front of the projection, and all of the silhouettes were really tight and classical shapes that were really influenced by punk music and punk musicians and that kind of thing. And there's always kind of a punk idea in all of his collections.
Mm. Do you think that is such an important part of something feeling punkish or feeling modern, is it being tied to a wider sort of cultural thing, whether that is, music or art, which, Raf has also looked at? Do you think that's what makes his work feel so relevant?
Yeah, I mean, when I see a Raf Simons collection, I'm always really fascinated about what he's been looking at that season and it's always like things that he's really passionate about anyway, whether it's art or music plays a really key role in his work. Yeah, I'm always interested about Raf's influences and inspirations, and I like the way he mixes different influences. So it could be like music that he listened to when he was a child growing up, and then like new technology that he's inspired by, or something that he saw on the street while he was designing the collections. There's always kind of a contrast there.
So it's the contradictions, like what we were talking about with Rei Kawakubo.
Yeah.
Maybe that's what makes something really punk then.
Yeah. Unexpected and contradictions, I think.
I like that you used the word unexpected, because I think that's really key to something being kind of seeming punkish on the runway, whatever the actual aesthetic. So you mentioned, Alaïa, it's obviously not punkish and aesthetic, but do you think it is just having that sort of element of the unexpected?
Yeah, definitely. I think all good things are about unexpected things. It's quite rare now to see something that's quite unusual and modern. And Ray and Dunya and Raf Simons kind of do that really well. And Phoebe Philo always do things that kind of surprise you and think, oh God, I didn't expect that to happen, or like who expected fur to be in Birkenstock shoes and be so appealing.
I think it's interesting, you said it's quite hard to do something modern now, and then you mentioned people like Raf and Phoebe at Celine. Do you think it is harder for younger designers to do anything that feels punkish, because everything has that element of feeling a little bit nostalgic, a little bit like it's been done before?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to be. I couldn't be a designer. I take my hat off to them, really. It's a very hard thing to keep turning out new things constantly. But I think we're very lucky. We've got a lot of designers that are really old and still working, and a lot of designers that turn out really interesting things. But then there are lots of exciting new designers. I really like what Simone Roche is doing, and lots of interesting new graduates.
But no one's got the same punkish spirit as Rei Kawakubo. No one's quite there yet.
No, I actually wouldn't be able to cite anyone new that really had that feeling for me.